Welcome everybody to the newest iteration of this month's Project Spotlight. We're continuing with the .NET theme of C Sharp, and I'm super excited because we have somebody who knows a little bit about C Sharp and the runtime and compiler. So I'm super excited to introduce Jared Parsons. Jared, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, so I'm Jared Parsons. I am the developer lead on the C Sharp compiler team. I'm also a member of the C Sharp language design team. I've actually overall been at Microsoft for about 17 years now, and a little over 15 of those years have been working in kind of like .NET tooling and languages in one way or the other. So an area I'm definitely very passionate about and excited to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to talk with you because, for one, as a developer, at least I call myself a developer. I don't know if I'm a developer anymore. Compilers, when I took them in school, it was even after completing the course, it was still like black box, right? And I think I have a lot of interest in people that they love working on compilers and they love working on kind of how the sausage gets made. Do you want to talk just a little bit about what your role specifically is on the compiler, the runtime, the underworking bits of how C Sharp and .NET work?
Sure. Well, at first, there's one comment you made there about like taking compilers in college, and it reminds me that when I took compilers in college, I decided that I hated them,
Sure.
and that to the point when I joined Microsoft, when they basically, when you back in those days, they have a checkbox. They're like, "What are your interests?" I checked every box except for web development and
Oh,
compilers
wow.
because I was like, "No way, I'm going near those again." And it turned out I ended up on a different team, but eventually got transferred into the compiler team because there were two things. It's like one, I understood what compilers were, and I liked the person. I had previously worked for the person who's in charge of them, and it turned out that production compilers and like actual real languages are a lot different than what you learn kind of in college.
Sure.
So it was a lot more fun to work on those than what we were doing in college. But in terms of my role, kind of like as I said, I'm the dev lead on the C Sharp team. Um, and so those things, what those involve is basically I do the way the C sharp language works is it's actually kind of two parts. There is kind of the language design team, which is a team of people who kind of go through and kind of set the direction of the language. Like here, like we want to do this set of features in the next version. Here are the designs. Here are kind of the specs. And then there's the compiler team who essentially takes those things and makes them real. Who says, okay, now how do we take that specification, this idea for a feature, and how do we actually get it into the compiler and get it so that it produces code, produces diagnostics, and then we work with the IDE team to produce like a beautiful experience around it. So I am mostly, my primary job is in charge of that latter bit. Like, how do we collect the series of proposals that the language design team has done? And how do we kind of turn them into a product that customers can have?
Sure.
How do we get it into Visual Studio? How do we get into the .NET SDK? I also do work on the language design team, as well as about half the compiler team is a part of that. And so we do spend a lot of, we are also very involved in how the language evolves there.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I guess with the moniker dev lead, the list of things that
Yeah.
you quote unquote are owner responsible for, when you lift it all out, you probably need a breath. I think one of the things that I'm very curious about is, obviously, since most of the work that you're doing is out in the open, it's on GitHub. How does the community? So obviously, with the runtime and compiler and all these things, these are things that are directly tied to like core products that an organization owns, right? That Microsoft owns.
Right.
But you do all the work out in the open. So how does the balance of community contribution versus like you said, making sure that the product is still resilient, and I guess at the end of the day, how do you balance those two things?
Um, it can be challenging at times. So one thing that so we've been open source about like 5 years now, 5 or 6 years now. And I remember like one of the things that when we kind of were making that transition from a closed source company to an open source one is I had to kind of like, we had to do a lot of management education for our management structure.
Sure.
And for instance, like I had to talk to my management team about, they're like, oh, there are all these like PRs in GitHub, like this is great, this is free features, free work, and it's all good. I'm like, no, 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 it's not free.
Yeah.
Like it's like PR from the community is no different than a PR from us. It's something that we have to spend time. We have to allocate resources to review it and incorporate it into our product. And that's also why I started like emphasizing more in reviews, like how much time were various devs spending on like getting community PRs merged in as opposed to like getting internal work. merged in. And it's overall like it's a huge net win to get
Yeah.
like work from the community, but it is just something that we have to spend time kind of like allocating for. And in terms of how we balance it, it can be a bit challenging because one of the biggest challenges is the community is kind of unpredictable.
Sure.
Like I have a series of devs. Like we have one-on-ones. We have a plan. We're like, okay, we're gonna work on like this feature this month. Then we're gonna like this should take you like this long, and then we'll like transition to that feature. And so there's a set of people for which I have a plan, and then the community might just show up one day and they're like, hey, I saw this like this feature like spec over there, and I thought about it for a while, and here's like an implementation. And so it can kind of be the like this unscheduled, unplanned work. And in terms of how you balance it, it can be challenging. Like one, you have to be pretty flexible. You have to be able to kind of have an expectation of like, okay, we'll probably get based on history, we'll probably get a certain number of PRs, and like we can probably take a kind of a baseline level of noise. But then sometimes we get some really big changes from the community, and like I almost have to sit down and like have kind of a meeting with some of the more senior devs and to say like, how should we deal with this?
Sure.
Should we maybe push this work that we were going to do, like push it back 2 weeks so that we have enough time to review this community contribution? Or should we tell the community member, like, hey, we're really in the thick of things right here. We're kind of at capacity right now. We will get back to you. We really enjoy this, but we just don't have time right now to review it. We will get back to you 1 month, 2 months, but like, please don't go away. And so it requires both kind of flexibility on my part and flexibility kind of on the community to understand that their work can sometimes be surprising
Sure.
to us. In general, though, what's really good is we do have enough regular contributors now that they have found like good channels of talking with us on either like Discord or GitHub, and they're getting much better about kind of telling us their plans. Like, hey, I'm going to take a crack at this. Like, we have one community member, ALRZ, who was like, hey, I saw that you all have a kind of a list patterns thing. You have it almost done. Like, can I try that? And he was like, I'm thinking about trying it kind of in this time span. And it's like, oh, this is great. I can plan about these things
Sure.
now. As opposed to just being like, oh, crap, there's a great PR. Like, do we have enough time to ship that? So,
yeah.
And the planning is actually really hard sometimes because one thing that I think people don't realize with language features is they tend to, I think a lot of times community kind of tends to think about language feature as like at the compiler level.
Sure.
Like I have a syntax, I type it in, and it emits code. And while that's partially true, C#, like compilers are really defined, languages are really defined by the ecosystem of the experiences.
Sure.
And so it's not just, I can translate text to code. Like you have that's more of a toy. Like it's, do I get IntelliSense in Visual Studio? Do I get highlighting for it? Like, what's the debugging experience? Do we have refactoring? It's like this whole experience. And so what can be really challenging is sometimes the community ends up picking up features where we take a look at that and I'm like, that has a huge impact on how Visual Studio works and how we kind of like do IntelliSense and formatting. And so then we have to go and like bring other leads in and be like, hey, we're going to do this feature now and it's really going to cost you because you have to like implement like, some better parsing on top of it. So it can definitely be challenging. It requires a lot of communication and a bit of flexibility.
Yeah, no, I mean that it sounds like a lot. Like it's almost like you're managing the people internally, the FTEs or full-time employees, but then you're managing the ether, right? Like it's great to hear that there are a set of contributors that you can see them. They come to. They're in issues. They're in pull requests. They're in discussions, right? Yeah. And occasionally you'll have somebody come out of nowhere. So let's say, for instance, there's somebody who, they're very curious about, the inner workings of how C# works. Like, where's a good place for them to start?
Well, I think there's a couple of good places to start. Like, if they're interested, there's two places I would tell people to definitely go to these days. Like, we have help wanted issues on the repo. If you're looking for, like, how can I make some contribution to Roslyn? Go to the Roslyn repo, look for help wanted issues. Like those, we try to flag the issues that we feel are very kind of like get people into the repo, get people into the flow of the code that we can help you get through your first pull request, your first issue. And it would be more about getting used to the experience rather than having to like dive into all of the crazy details of how things work. Also, go to our Discord channel. So we have the Discord channel for C# like listed right on our README. And I tell people, go there to ask questions because both we have a huge number, a pretty significant majority of the team who works on the C# language experience, like hangs out in the Discord and regularly answers questions with community. But we also have increasingly those uh, community members who are strong
Sure.
contributors. So they are the strong contributors. They hang out there as well, and they are very good at helping customers, through like these like bring up experiences and how to get into the repo. And so I definitely say like find the help wanted issues, hang out in the Discord, and also if none of that's working, just post issues on GitHub.
Sure.
We are pretty responsive to those as well, and we definitely can help you work through your problems.
So that's great. In the situation where a developer wants to come and contribute in some way, that sounds like a pretty straight runway as to contributing, right? So, but what in the situation, and I have this conversation with folks all the time, maybe they're a little bit too nervous to write code that's going to go into the runtime or go into the compiler. Is there opportunities for contributions in, say, documentation or testing or things like that that could, I guess, be a little bit more low-hanging than contributing directly to the runtime or some of the other pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are always in need of better documentation. But documentation is something that, as much as we write, we can always write
Sure.
more and better documentation. We have specific labels for documentation bugs. We have labels for test bugs, and we even have labels for things like something we call like concept like diagnostic clarity, where it's things that's like we're not asking you to like fix a bug.
Sure.
We're just saying there's an error message that could be better.
Yeah.
Like error messages, the better the error message, the better the customer is able to kind of self fix their code. They don't have to go to Google. They can keep that inner loop going faster. And there are a lot of suggestions we've gotten over the years of like maybe you could change the error message to be a little more expressive, or if it's on this case, like just make it a little. If you point it out that like it was off this identifier instead of that identifier, it'd make the message so much more actionable. And those are bugs which are generally like it is going into the product,
Yeah.
but it is more about like just like helping the experience out, and they tend to be a little bit lower bar. But also, I would say that there's people who are like willing to contribute tasks, like be adventurous,
Yeah.
come like try to fix product bugs. We're more than happy to help you kind of like get started and work through those issues.
Yeah, so again, I think that's great, especially for people that, especially people that are new to contributing in general. I think Docs is a great entry for people that maybe they don't have a ton of experience contributing to code in general that's on GitHub. Like you said, you'll take any documentation, right? Anybody that wants to provide docs, you'll go for it. I am curious as to somebody who they do want to get started contributing to the underlying bits. Are there any requirements to, do they need machine specifications, or they need some set of rules? Is that documented somewhere?
So in terms of machine specifications, we have like right off of our README, we have like contributing from Windows, contributing from Linux, and that will kind of tell you like what it is. In general, we try to have as few requirements as possible, because the more requirements you have, the like one thing I kind of been like talk to people when they're starting open source repos is every requirement you have is a speed bump to contributions. It's like one more thing people have to do, and it's kind of enforced that we actually all of our PRs we try to run them on machines that are just like blank Windows images. So like you can clone a repo on a blank Windows image, build tests, run all of our tests, and everything will work. And so we try to like keep that bar as low as possible. That being said, like most people use Visual Studio to develop in our code base, and we do have a very large solution. So it's
Yeah.
generally like I can use it on my Surface laptop, on my Surface Book, and my Surface Book 2. I can develop Roslyn pretty comfortably, but it's a lot better on my desktop machine.
Yeah. No, I can only
Um,
imagine.
and then the second part, what was it? It was asking. What was the second part of your
It
question?
was just, I think it was the second part of it was more or less just, are there any other barriers, like you mentioned a little bit about
Ah,
wanting to keep as many barriers, at least amount of barriers
right.
possible, right?
So, yeah. So the other ones we have, the other kind of barriers we have is like we do have a pretty like strongly enforced coding convention.
Yeah.
So we do use the .NET code styling. So it's kind of the standard C# code that pretty much the entire .NET team uses. We have that code and we kind of enforce it on pull requests. And so we use the kind of standard Visual Studio style checker to make sure everything's, braces are on the right
Yep.
places and things like that. For the most part, that's if you're using Visual Studio, it's not that much of a
Hmm.
hassle, because Visual Studio will just format your code that way
Yep.
as you type. It's more as sometimes there could be naming conventions with like Camel versus Pascal that people miss that we kind of like will poke you on a little bit in the code reviews. The only other kind of barrier we really have is it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about pull requests are kind of a resource investment. Is we do tell people like we have a lot of people come to us and they're like, hey, I have a language feature I want to do. And we kind of tell them like, don't start with a pull request
Yeah.
because we will close it.
Sure.
And the reason why, and it's not meant to be mean, it's meant to be more that language features require a huge investment.
Yep.
It's both an investment in our time to review it, it's an investment in your time to finish it, it's an investment in the IDE's time to like kind of contribute the experience. And so we actually, there's a kind of a process for submitting language features. And like kind of the first step is getting a design that the C# language design team buys off on. And the second step is we kind of tell people it's like for anything other than like a bug fix level feature, we really kind of have to know the person before we'll kind of accept it because we ask the people if they're like, hey, I've never contributed before and I want to do a feature. We're like, okay, start with a few bug fixes.
Yeah.
Like let's do a big bug fixes. Make sure that you are kind of comfortable with the level of rigor we require, that you're comfortable with the time investment. And after you've done a couple of bug fixes and gotten like a little bit more work and we can get comfortable with you as a developer, and then we're like, okay, now we have like a good relationship and we can kind of predict like that we're going to be on the same page here with how these features go. And then tell people like, now we think you're ready. If you want to kind of take on a feature, we'd be happy to help support you, get it into our schedule and get things going. And that's the only barrier we create, but we create that both to make sure that we're using our time effectively and that people kind of understand like, what are you signing up for? And we think after you've done a number of bug fixes, maybe kind of some like larger bug fixes, it's like, okay, you understand what you're signing up for here. You've seen the scrutiny we apply, you've kind of gotten used to the pattern, and we can give you an estimation of like, sometimes people even come to say, I want to do this feature. And we're like, start with this feature first. Like that one is a huge bite off. Like start over here and kind of like work your way up. And in many ways, it's almost how we treat our own FTEs. It's like, hey, like this is how we don't start you with a crazy hard feature. We start you with some bug fixes. Yeah. We build you up to the point where you're ready, and we give you incrementally harder work. So that's kind of the only real barrier we put in place.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, it sounds like you're doing an incredible job of fostering people to want to contribute, right? And, back on your point earlier, it's like free work, yay, but the amount of effort it takes to make that free work quality is substantial, right? So, I mean, it sounds to me like there's a good combination of effort put in by the greater .NET team to make sure the community is empowered enough to contribute, which I think is really essential.
I mean, it's something we've always wanted to be true, but I will not lie and say that it was true the moment we started. Like there was definitely some like learning gaps that we had when we started. Like one thing I do a lot internally is if existing teams at Microsoft who have internal only projects and they're like, hey, we're going to move to GitHub. Like like Emo Landworth, we go and do a presentation for them on like, these are the things you're probably not thinking about when you're going to GitHub. Here are the mistakes we made. And mistakes we made were like bad documentation, having all these internal practices. Like one of the big mistakes we made was when we went to GitHub, we did not have any documentation that said that kind of advised people against just opening a pull request with their favorite language feature. And so people would like spend a week developing this feature that they were very passionate about, and they put lots of time into it. And then they would open a pull request in our repo, and we'd be like, "What are you doing? Like, this is not how we do work here." And we close it, and they were like, "Well, you didn't tell me not to do it." And so I thought it was okay. And it's like, oh my god, like they're right. Like we to do these things. And so a lot of these things around like kind of documentation, bringing people up, the help wanted issues, a lot of it is kind of like mistakes we've made along the way, and like taking feedback from the community and figured out like how do we correct, how do we kind of make this work and be good for everyone.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're doing a great job. And I can only thank you so much for coming on, chatting a little bit about, the work that you're doing. I think, for folks that want to get started, I think Jared, laid out a ton of options, right? There's help wanted repos, there's sub labels on some particular issues that are more tied to docs or more tied to diagnostics. So please take advantage of those. So again, Jared, I want to thank you so much for your time on here. And did you have any parting words?
No, I just say like definitely please, contribute if you want. If not, just drop by and say hello. The Discord is a fantastic place. If you're just interested in .NET and you don't even necessarily want to contribute, you just want to learn more, jump on the Discord. There is great conversations going on there, and it is a fantastic place to just kind of be in the .NET community.
Yeah, and for the folks that are watching this video, the Discord, the URL is going to be in the Project Spotlight page attached to this video, so please take a look at it when you have time. And again, so my name is Isaac Levin. This is Jared Parsons. Thank you so much for tuning into this iteration of Project Spotlight C#.
All right. Thanks, everyone.